with CMS Communications. We are a technology advisory firm headquartered out of St. Louis, but we have office locations all across the country. Chicago, Texas, California, Virginia, not meaning to do anything symbolic, just that's where, we are. And today we wanted to host an educational webinar, and we wanted to invite some of our favorite providers and vendors and suppliers to answer some questions for us, but not just for us, but also for all of you, our clients, our partners, our friends, because today's webinar is about cybersecurity and AI. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. There's so many different aspects of it. AI is not just a product that I can hand you and it's sold. It is in everything. So is cybersecurity, and the goal is to keep everything secure, to keep everything away from nefarious hands, if you will. So today, part of the reason why we are hosting this event is to educate you, educate ourselves on our different primary partners that we have here, and see how each one of them individually and uniquely can utilize some of these tools and tactics and their technologies to pretty much help mankind, if you will, and each one of your companies individually. A little bit more about CMS Communications, just so everyone knows. What we like to do, we are, again, a technology advisor, but we got our start in telecommunications back in the 80s. Telecom hardware, IT hardware, routers, servers, switches, and then on-premise installations of phone systems. We moved, as the world evolved, we evolved, and we started moving into cloud-based solutions like UCaaS and CCaaS, connectivity, software programs, and now cybersecurity. We've been doing for a little while, and AI as well. There are so many different ways that we use artificial intelligence, just even in a Google search. You don't realize how much data you're putting into Google to allow them to have that so that you can get the Hulu ads that show that thing you just looked up. And maybe you want to keep that data a little more secure when it comes to your organization. So that is the reason why we're here today. We wanted to talk about securing these practices, and we also wanted to talk about just, some of the other aspects, like what is AI? Is it turning into Skynet? Will we have Terminators soon? Who knows? That's why we're here. So I'm going to pass this over to Jason Stein, who is the Vice President of Cybersecurity at Telarus. And he's going to talk to you guys about a little bit about this as well. And then we're going to have each one of our partners here introduce themselves. And if anyone has any questions, please go to the chat. Please type in the question. We are going to get to those during this webinar, and then we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards. And one last thing, if you are interested in working with us for a discovery or any one of the providers you see here today, in the chat, I'm typing an email address, cloud@cmsc.com is where you guys can go to get started with us. So with that being said, I'll stop talking because my wife and everybody else I know says I babble. So Jason.
Hey, Dan, thanks for allowing us to join here. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedules. We have a great panel today. I know we're going to be talking a little bit about cyber and artificial intelligence. And, I wanted to kind of set the table for what we're seeing today. A lot of what we're seeing is that most organizations are going to be implementing multiple things within an artificial intelligence standpoint, whether it's a large language model or it's adopting more artificial intelligence within your organization to improve efficiency, to make your customer experience better. It's interesting because Deloitte actually says that this is a $757 billion conversation this year. But what's really fascinating is that a lot of organizations, only 12%, are following a framework, following some type of roadmap, following some type of governance. Yet, this is a $6.5 billion conversation as well. And, a lot of times artificial intelligence is being driven down by a leadership team, a board of directors who say, oh, I heard about this thing, artificial intelligence, and we'd like to implement more of it. But yet they're not really understanding all the ramifications and how to protect it, and that there's compliances involved, and how do you protect the tools, and how do you protect the data, and how do you protect the people. And then when you think about cybersecurity, a lot of different things. Artificial intelligence is number one. Then you start to get into governance, risk, and compliance. And we really see not only that governance, especially around AI, but NIST, and then CMMC is just making a huge showing this year. And then risk is a lot of times being driven down by the board. And many organizations are not fully equipped to have identified all their risks, figured out what dollar amounts we should be associating with each of those risks. How do we prioritize? How do we make sure that risk is a priority? You have internal risks like employees, you have external risks like third-party vendors, and then you have a lot of risks that you're not even aware of. Compliance is definitely one of those things with all the different changes coming in January that we need to be aware of. And then studying the user behavior, putting better passwords in play, making sure that we're doing security awareness training, even though every employee in the history of employees doesn't want to do that. And then, putting better passwords in place because everyone wants to put their kid's name or their pet's name and their birthday with a dollar sign, and so we have some amazing suppliers. So what I thought would be good is, Dan, if you're all right with that, let's have each of the suppliers do a quick little introduction for a minute, and then we'll jump into some really good questions that I think will be beneficial for a lot of the people on the call.
Sounds good to me. So let's go ahead and start. So I've got, there's no order here. I just wrote down as we all started popping in. So let's go ahead and start with you, Dane. You're the first one in right after me.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for attending. My name is Dane Nairns. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Sky Data Vault. I spent over a decade as an enterprise architect securing cloud infrastructures for commercial and government environments. As a CTO of Sky Data Vault, I built our immutable backup architecture and led real-time DR as a service programs with sub 5-minute RPO guarantees. My expertise spans AI security from adversarial prompt hardening to algorithmic trading bots and adaptive risk models. I built AI systems for federal government procurement and currently developing an AI-driven backup monitoring solution that scans for indicators of compromise. Protecting thousands of customer environments gives me a front row insight into how adversaries leverage AI for ransomware campaigns. We saw one this morning. I also volunteer my skills for community impact, like building systems for local food pantries. My wife jokes that I simply cannot leave a problem unsolved. So, Dan, your wife and I have a lot in common there, or my wife and your wife. I'm eager to tackle the bleeding edge challenges at the intersection of AI and cybersecurity, spark dynamic discussions on real world solutions, and explore with fellow experts what new attack vectors and defenses lie just over the horizon.
All right, that was great. Thank you very much, Dane. I appreciate it. Ron, let's move next to you.
Yeah, sure. So Ron Ruby, Chief Operating Officer of Vertec Corporation. So just a little bit about the company. And I've been here for, going on about 26 years. So really invested in kind of what we've built here. So we've had a 24/7 US-based security operations center for about 10 years now. Our core service that we provide to clients is focused on threat detection and response. We integrate with client security products, ensuring that they're configured correctly and provide monitoring and incident response capabilities. Or we bring in a mix of our own technology, kind of best in breed, that we believe is going to make the right impact for the client. Our SOC is always evolving, and it is energized by AI. Matter of fact, we just actually relaunched the new vertec.com. So you can look at www.vertec.com for some of the latest enhancements that we have. If you would have asked me a couple years ago about our mission, I would have said, hey, we're here to detect and respond to events and incidents quickly. These days, I would say that, we're here to defeat data breaches. We've done enough forensics over the years. We led with security information event management. We actually brought it into the channel very early on. And now, we know exactly kind of what causes the data breaches, what controls need to be configured, and then what behaviors to look for. And so, we really service customers as low as, as few as 10 to 15 devices, all the way up to 10,000 devices. So we really run the gamut when it comes to clients. And yeah, I mean, we're really looking forward to, to the AI use. We use AI in layers here at Vertec. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Ron. Rich, how about you go next?
Thanks, Dan. So Rich Etry, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for ECI. For those of you not familiar with ECI, we are a global MSP. I like to frame us as a modern MSP. We have core infrastructure, cloud, cybersecurity, data, and AI. Think of us as taking everything from your application layer and data layer all the way up to your core infrastructure from networking and wrapping that in cyber security. I spend a lot of time these days on data and AI, so I oversee our cloud, cybersecurity, data, and AI offerings. I also drive a lot of our internal AI initiatives as well. So we've recently been deploying about 37 agents to the cloud to help optimize and manage drift. We're doing a lot on the cybersecurity side as well. So we built our own proprietary agents to not only detect, but take action on things based on client runbooks that integrates with our SOAR. And on the client-facing side, we have a lot of solutions. Our Ella Suite is our brand of AI products that we sell to our clients. We mainly operate in the highly regulated space. So everything we do with AI has a security and compliance wrapper around it. And that's why I'm excited to join today's call, because we get to talk a lot about AI and what's in the space and what we're doing around cybersecurity to control your data and help you really leverage AI in your business in a secure, compliant way.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Rob, last but not least.
Yeah, last but not least, hey guys, hopefully everybody's okay. My name is Robbie Gulry. I work for a company called Rapid Scale. I am the field CTO. I personally have a lot of experience in cybersecurity. Hopefully, we'll get into some of the details here at the webinar. But if you don't know Rapid Scale really is an organization that thinks through some of the challenges that exist around multi-cloud or hybrid cloud. We help our customers kind of think through that. Number two is really the area of cyber resilience. So some of the things we're going to talk about today obviously cover that umbrella, which includes backup and DR and all the resiliency sort of strategies that exist today. And thirdly, a lot of folks have already mentioned it, is really data and AI readiness. So if you think about today, you can't have a conversation about cloud without having a conversation about security, and you can't have a conversation about those two while you talk about AI. So it's sort of the three legs in the stool, and looking forward to hopefully learning and providing some insights to the audience.
All right. Robbie, thank you very much. And thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate it. I'm dangerous enough when it comes to cybersecurity and AI to talk on the top layer, but Jason Stein here is the one really going to be leading the conversation. So I wanted to pass it back off to you, Jason, to get things going, if that's all right.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's talk about AI. So AI is the #1 trend this year. Everyone's doing something within AI. You heard the stat. Deloitte says it's a $700 billion conversation. Gartner says it's a $350 billion conversation. A lot of organizations trying to do something, implement it, not following a framework. Rich, you hit on something that I thought was really good, and then Robbie also. We worry about the gotchas. So one, Rich, let's start with you. How do we optimize artificial intelligence better? What are some of the gotchas as clients are coming to you that they didn't think about when they're trying to implement this? So let's go Rich, Robbie, Ron, and then we'll go back to Dane. Rich, start around, what are you doing to help customers optimize? Can it be an automatic artificial intelligence execution and executable? And then what are some of the gotchas that we're worried about when you're talking to customers that they overlook as they're continuing to take that AI journey?
Jason, I think very topical. So I think one of the biggest hurdles I see, and I think this is really important for a lot of the advisors on, is clients oftentimes have a hard time getting their AI program started, right? Whether it's getting their arms around the data, right, and being concerned about the quality of data, whether it be selecting the right tool or understanding how, like use cases, how they could use AI in their organization. And then in general, how do I develop guardrails? So when you think about those four things, they tend to be, the biggest hurdles in getting your AI program off the ground. And one thing that we've done is we've tried to kind of templatize that to a degree. So we have what I would say is a kind of framework for, a AI program for security and compliance out of the box, right? So we can bring that to the table and we help expedite the client's process. By doing that, we help expedite the process and then getting the AI tools in-house, right? And you always have to kind of tweak those, but at least giving them an idea of what the guardrails are, what are the things you need to think about, what are the things you need to fill in some of these boxes is really helpful. The next big piece is the use cases, right? Everyone wants to know what use cases are, but every organization is vastly different, right? Even within the same verticals, people are in different places in their application and their data journey. So what we really try and do is kind of find an MVP, minimally viable product, or a POC, proof of concept, that is impactful to the organization, right? But it's something we can get off the ground quickly that fits within the guardrails that we defined. Because the key thing is about getting momentum. The one thing that we find is that we will do a very simple use case and people are wowed. Like whether it's taking PDFs that are sent over via email every day into an inbox, someone's reading them throughout the day, summarizing it, sending it back out. If just doing that automatically, right, in that person's tone, right, sending the email correctly, we're like, wow, we have some other use cases downstream that could be more impactful, right? And you get more funding, you get more momentum when you have those use cases that are winning. The other key piece tends to be the data, right? Everyone gets concerned. My data's not clean. If you asked every CTO, and look, I spent my career as a CTO before joining ECI, I could tell you I would never hang my hat and say all my data was clean. But you can't let that get in the way of starting an AI project. There's just too much ROI in it. As you mentioned earlier, Jason, the C-level is really driving, AI programs down right into the organization. You can't tell them, well, I can't really do this because our data isn't good, right? I think what we try and do is work with them around understanding where the gaps in the data set they want to use is. So even if that POC doesn't have clean data, we try to understand where the gaps are and we fix it, right, as part of that program. And I think that's the key thing. Like you're never gonna, if you try and boil the ocean with data, you'll never get there, right? And AI allows you to really optimize some of that journey around data security and cleanliness. And I think picking those POCs, isolating that data, that's going to get you, off the ground quickly. And again, I think to many of the advisors out here, those are things for you to talk about with your clients as well. Like you're probably going to hear a lot of those things as pushbacks and try and use some of this that I mentioned to you today to kind of get past that.
Thanks, Rich. Robbie?
Yeah, I'm going to actually add to what Rich is saying. Bad data, bad AI. Good data, good AI. Pretty causal kind of causality, right? I spent a lot of time, Jason, really helping our customers first define what data is. Believe it or not, even today in 2025, there's some challenges there. A lot of folks still think that data is in a database, which absolutely that's true. But there's data, structured and unstructured, sitting in places that are potentially leverageable for organizations. Now, that potentially, sort of recognizes some security challenges. So the first thing is just helping customers define data. Secondly is really defining the distinction between some of these buzzwords that get thrown around that are frankly should be synonymous, but they are used synonymously. Automation, AI, and generative AI. There's some distinctions there. And so the next step is really to, again, just after the definitional stage, is to help organizations kind of think through what a simple use case is. This is exactly what Rich is referring to. Let's just help you come up with one or two use cases. Let's give you some examples of how other organizations, other industries, other platforms have basically been able to leverage this type of approach. I think once we start there with the data strategy as well as alignment to a use case, and then what we do is we try to basically map out the structure of the kind of data. Sometimes it's the data is available internally. Often data is available externally, which also potentially introduces some security challenges. But let's get a holistic view of what your data collection, aggregation, enrichment, and sort of extraction process is going to look like. Once we get there, And we feel like we're pretty confident with that sort of process. The rest of the AI modeling, building, deploying, securing tends to be a lot easier. So it's not a one, it's not the same thing every single time, but there is sort of a method to the madness in terms of a methodology.
Love it. Thanks, Robbie. Ron?
Yeah, so what I would say is for Vertec, we don't typically get asked, "Hey, Vertec, can you build me out an AI program?" Usually, they're coming to us because they've had a data breach, or they've had some sort of compromise, or they're looking to evolve their tool set. And so, we really look at AI in terms of what do they have that we can leverage, right? Because a lot of times, as an example, clients are using an endpoint product, right? And that endpoint product probably has, if they're using SentinelOne, Microsoft, right, CrowdStrike, they're all using a form of, machine learning, some behavioral analysis, all of those pieces of it. And we look to say, okay, well, how are we going to layer that? So those are telemetry pieces, right? Those are environmental kind of pieces of data that are, or pieces of tool sets that are using data. And then we kind of layer that up to say, okay, well, if you've got EDR products in there, we want to layer that. Is the next step is platform AI is like XDR. Okay, so now you're looking at one data source. Now we want to be looking at your identity. We want to be looking at your endpoint with your mail, with your messaging security, and bringing that bringing that together in XDR. And that has another layer of machine learning. Then you layer on that again with AI response capabilities. What can we bring our analysts, right, for data that is meaningful? Because at the end of the day, they came to us because they had a problem of detecting and responding to threats quickly. So our job in using AI is to make sure we respond as quickly as possible, right? To be able to those threats and be able to bring in all of this data using multiple different sources. So that's kind of the way that we see it, and all the way up to being able to use it as our own learning sets, right? So now you've got from a client perspective, you've got endpoint products going up to a service provider like me that's providing XDR and SIEM capabilities. Well, now I'm creating a data lake, right, of all of these different industries, of all of these different clients, and all of these different elements of security incidents that we're seeing. We're tagging everything, we're grouping everything, we're putting artifacts into all of those pieces of it, and then we're running analytics and some machine learning on top of that to say, okay, what do we learn from this? And what can we do to positively impact that client environment, so that we can say, hey, this is where you're deficient. Because even some of those products that I mentioned before on the even endpoint detection, those require tuning, those require maintenance, right? You can fall out. You guys have said it, right? Bad data in, bad data out, bad tunes. All of that can lead to insecure operations, right? You can have the best product, have it insecurely configured, and have a bad result. And so looking over all that and kind of bringing it together, leveraging AI at multiple different layers is kind of how we approach it.
Love it. Thanks, Ron. How about you, Dane?
Yeah, we leverage AI in a couple different ways, but I'm going to kind of piggyback off what Robbie was saying and tap into the whole data structuring piece, right? Having a good data game is extremely important. And one of the things that we're noticing with our clients is a lot of them don't have the ability to fund that sort of effort to create that sort of data lake. And as a backup provider, we actually have a very interesting add in here where what we're looking into is how to actually leverage backup data to be able to use that as a way to give data to your AI, so that way you don't have to build out data lakes. You don't have to build out all that infrastructure underneath that. You already have all your data typically in one place when you install a backup solution. So what we're looking at is figuring out how to leverage what we already have and give that to our existing customers as a way to expose that to their AI, so they don't have to go out and search out all this data and do all that. We've already got it in our infrastructure and can use that. The other way that we leverage AI to, give our customers a lot of benefits is that we have another layer inside of our data set that we can see for indicators of compromise. So using AI to monitor your data set and make sure that if you start to see files getting encrypted that haven't been encrypted for ages, that's probably an indicator of compromise. So we can search through, for malware signatures, for things like encryption that are happening very rapidly, to be able to let our customers know if there's a problem.
Thanks, Dane. So, Dane, we're going to start with you. So, if you think about artificial intelligence, so it's brand new in cybersecurity. We've never used AI. Just kidding. So, if you think about artificial intelligence, been around in cybersecurity for years. I mean, we're talking 10, 15 years. We've been using machine learning, artificial intelligence. It's interesting as you start to look, what are the biggest impacts that AI is having from a cybersecurity standpoint? You have things like better detection for advanced threat detection. AI SOCs now. You have AI vulnerability assessments and being able to find vulnerabilities faster. AI in the cloud to help protect the data. AI protecting the users better. And then, people accessing the data. So let's start with Dane. We'll go back the same way we just did. Dane, Ron, Robbie, Rich. How is it, and I expect you guys to all have a little bit of different viewpoint. What is the biggest impact that AI's had in your organization when it comes to security? What do you think the biggest advancements have been AI, especially specific to Dane, with Sky Data Vault?
Yeah, well, what I would say is it's helped a lot internally, but the biggest thing that we see is the externals. We have a lot of customers running in our environment, and what we see is the adversaries can actually iterate faster. So it creates the iterative speed of security needs to be so much more rapid now that we have to be utilizing those things internally to be able to stay up with the attackers. The attackers become so much more advanced in such a short period of time because now they can write code so quickly. That changes the landscape for us. So we have to be monitoring everything real time with AI agents, be watching for new signatures, new things that we've never seen before, because 0 days happen at light speed now. I mean, we never know. Any day now, anything could happen. We can see something pop up. So that's why we have to leverage AI agents to watch all our logs. We have to leverage anything and everything possible to make sure that if we start seeing anything change in our environment, that's a big, alert flag right there that we're going to be watching for.
Ron, when you think about Vertex Cybersecurity, a lot of advances, AI SOC, AI threat detection, AI protecting users. What's been the biggest impactful thing, and how are you using AI to make Vertex even better?
I would have to say, if I had to put one thing, it would probably be the triage. Like how long it would take an analyst. I mean, back in the day, it used to take an analyst, 30,
Hours.
45 minutes, right, to be able to figure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking an advanced one, right? Like not, it would take you a long time to curate all this information, and even using an API into like OpenAI as an example for decoding a PowerShell command. How is this command being used? In enabling the analyst to have all of that data at their fingertips, and I'm not talking about, sensitive personal information or confidential information. Like, I've got a PowerShell command, like, what is this? What could this be used for? Could this be used for nefarious processes? Could this be, and you get that data aggregated to a human that is qualified to interpret that data. And you can really speed up the incident response process from the meantime to triage to the meantime to resolve. By, I'm talking like, it's pretty big. I mean, our average now for high severities is down in the, it's in minutes at this point. When it used to be, our SLAs used to be, 30, 45, an hour, right? So I would have to say that's been probably the biggest advancements. Now we are all going for, the autonomous detection response. That's probably next after XDR, autonomous detection response pieces. We're not quite there yet. We're still at the point of needing a human to be able to interpret and bring this client data, or bring the learnings to the client.
I love that. Robbie, so RapidScale, huge cloud provider, a lot of security now. But yeah, you're part of the Cox family, so you're dealing with users and connectivity. What's been most impactful for your organization as you're having to deal with all those different aspects of the business?
Yeah, I think, Jason, you're absolutely right. We in cybersecurity have been using machine learning and anomaly detection and various techniques for a long, long time. But I tell you, and this is, I think, the dynamic for all of us, including the technology advisors and your customers out there, is COVID happened, and all of a sudden, even more so than before, business is no longer done inside the four walls of pretty much any organization. Just rapid scale over the last few years, we've gone from 130, 140 employees to over 800, and very few of us work in an office on a regular basis. We're constantly on the road. And so that in itself, as a dynamic to make sure that we enable zero trust, we've got appropriate policies in place to get access to the right user with the right data, with the right device, all that SASE stuff. that we love to talk about is applied and implemented in the right way inside of our organization. And I think a lot of other businesses in pretty much every industry are facing that. And we continue to evolve, our internal security postures as well. And by the way, you add another layer on top of that, which is this notion of BYOD. A lot of us have our own MacBooks or iPhones that we're leveraging, to access corporate resources. That's internal. External, I think Ron said it perfectly, is the level of complexity across the stack it just gets wider and wider and taller. Therefore, we're capturing data, basically across a multitude of platforms into a SEM environment. We've got, again, distributed work, distributed apps, cloud-based applications, private, hybrid, multi-public cloud. Workloads are everywhere. And so if you start thinking about how business is being done, how do you capture all of that data? How do you offer a service that can basically, generate insights in the data? And that's ultimately what we think about when we try to serve our customers.
Awesome. Thanks, Robbie. So Rich, you guys are doing cloud, you're doing security. I think you guys are a security first organization. You have databases in DBA, and then you're protecting that. You guys do so much from an ECI standpoint. What's been the prioritization for you guys, and how has AI been helping make ECI even better from a cybersecurity standpoint?
AI has been a really powerful tool for us to create speed to response, right? I think everyone touched on it a little bit here. The threat actors, the threat environment in general has never been more complex than it is today. I mean, OpenAI released a report about how Chinese threat actors have been trying to use their platforms, right? Beyond just, DeepSeek, and, you can generate a lot of powerful malware from DeepSeek because there's no controls on it. So we started looking at just the inbound tickets themselves, right? As security alerts come in, I think Ron touched on this as well. How can we enrich those quickly, right? How can we put the right data in the analyst's hands? How can we automate more? So this way we take a ticket that's a P1 that may have taken 15 minutes, that takes 2 or 3 minutes, right? And this really isn't about cost, right? This is really about speed to response, right? And I think, even though we were using SOAR tools, AI has added another level of enrichment. So now we can look at tickets that, similar tickets that have come in across all clients, what were previous, indicators of compromise. We could look across the threat intel database, and now we could even start taking some actions, right? So, we have well over 400 cyber clients, that we manage full MSSP for. And if we see one bad domain in one client, we block it for all of our clients, right? And there's a process around doing that. But that process takes a while, right? Because you got to everyone has a different change control and all those types of things. So what we've begun to do with a lot of our clients is integrate that into their change control process, right? And sit with them and say, hey, these are the shoot first items. These are the things we think we want to go block that maybe we don't need permission from you to do. These are the things that need permission for you to do, and we'll send you a notification to be able to do that, much faster than previously, right? Getting email out of the loop and other types of things, and really just being able to respond to threats faster, right? And really getting the salient information in front of the SOC analysts. Think of all the noise, even with just a phishing email, even if you automate it, it would take on average, 15 minutes, right, to kind of go through. We've got it down to 90 seconds now. Right. And that is a huge difference, right? I think people don't realize that kind of scale, right? And then if you can get that email removed from everyone's inbox in another 90 seconds, you've now neutralized a critical threat in the organization in, 3 minutes, right? And that speed to response is going to become increasingly important, right? As, the threat actor environment just, continues to get difficult for us. So.
Thanks, Rich. All right, let's start with you, Robbie, then we'll go Rich, Ron, and Dane. So let's talk about organizations trying to incorporate AI to improve cybersecurity. So one, we're trying to identify, the best way to implement LLMs, large language models. First off, what's the best LLM out there? Just kidding. No, I know you didn't answer that. But if everyone wants to incorporate their own large language model, and they're thinking Chat GPT or they're thinking Copilot, The problem is if you start from scratch, there's no data in it. So then all of a sudden you start to add all this data, and then you got to worry about compliance, the tools, the people accessing it, encryption, data masking, monitoring. You need to worry about adversarial attacks and training. So better access controls. There needs to be better accountability. So, Robbie, as people are starting to implement how can they implement AI to better protect their organizations from a cybersecurity standpoint? And what's the biggest threat that you worry about? All those things that I just answered or put out there. What's the biggest thing that you worry about that customers don't always think about? What can you tell all the clients on this call that they should prioritize?
Yeah, I'll start with the second question first, Jason. Yeah, I think we've all heard enough about it now. I'm old, I'm 53, and I've been in technology for a long, long time. And we used to worry. I used to run IT way back in the day, and I used to worry about shadow IT. Some guy in marketing running some server or some application that I didn't approve. Well, we got to worry about shadow AI right now, for sure. And so the notion of shadow AI, I think most people on the Zoom call will probably understand conceptually, but I don't think they understand it in their day-to-day processes. I was actually training some of my sales team earlier today. I'm like, guys, you cannot upload this PDF file to an LLM. There's a lot of proprietary information available here within this environment, and you're training the public models with our proprietary data for our competitors to take advantage of. And so those are simple use cases. Unfortunately, the user community, we all know this, don't always think about these kind of things. So shadow AI is definitely top of mind for a lot of us who are, in the AI world. How do we prevent that from happening? Obviously, there's a number of tools. There's Shadow Shield, Liminal. There's a handful of companies out there that are doing some really interesting proxy through kind of environments that are connecting and doing token management across all the different LLMs. There's definitely some options of deployment there. And they also do employee sentiment analysis. They'll do things like, redact information and send it to the LLMs. And then once the prompts come back with some results, they'll actually unredact it, if that's a word. So there's definitely some things that we can do to help, alleviate some of that shadow AI. So I think that's number one. Your first question was really around, again, cybersecurity and AI. I think we've been experiencing this in the world of AI often, or the world of cybersecurity. I think with AI, speaking of sentiment, you can do a lot of sentiment and behavior analysis that you couldn't do before. You can leverage AI to analyze communication, tone, login behavior, all kinds of user sort of activity, to be able to really, again, discover either by intent or otherwise some of the unauthorized apps, services being leveraged, et cetera. So I think insider threat detection would be probably the number one thing I would point to as it relates to leveraging AI to help organizations just be, more hardened when it comes to security posture.
I love it. Rich, what do you got?
Well, look, I think with AI, people don't realize the power of implementing some of these tools. I think they often take for granted, like even something simple as turning on like Microsoft Copilot. These AI tools, they look at you, your persona, and they have your permissions. Now, if you've been, over allocated permissions over the years, maybe companies haven't done a great job on identity and access management. Now someone can see that data that they may not have been able, that they didn't even know they had access to, right? Really good example we use, like comp data. You can go in, if you have access to like comp data and you didn't know it, you can go in and type a simple question in a Copilot and it'll return you whatever information it finds, right? So one of the things that we did right from the beginning, whether it was Copilot or even our kind of core tool, Ella, was really think about data security and identity and access management. And that is part of every AI project that we do. And it's part of any implementation of even Copilot that we do with our clients, is really going through looking at who can access what, right? And making sure that those permissions are, correct. Again, like everyone's rushing to get these tools in and they don't stop and think like, hey, if I was going to implement like a new platform, I'd want to make sure the permissions were right. I'd want to make sure that I had enablement, training that goes along with it. I think those things are often overlooked for the speed to, get to market. The other piece is that, we haven't touched on it a lot, but when we advise clients around AI, one of the big things is that every SaaS vendor now has their own AI platform, right? That they're pitching, selling, they want you to use, and people are like, okay, yeah, let's turn it up. But you need to do vendor due diligence, right? As if it was a new product, right? Because they're in the same race that all of us are, right? And I'm not going to name names on vendors, but we had one that we wanted to turn up internally, and we did a due diligence on it and found that they had, shared vector databases for certain client data, right? And again, it wasn't something they intentionally did, right? As we started to go through the architecture and peel it away, we found, right? And it was because they had probably had rushed things to market and not really taken the time to design it properly, right? So the other big piece is, that third party vendor management really needs to change. Like, you often have your most prized assets sitting in these SaaS systems, right? You got to make sure that you're reviewing how those tools are being implemented and used across the board. It's always that saying, trust but verify. That I think that's key when it comes to third party data, being in some of these platforms. The last piece I'll say is that we've done a lot of great work with Microsoft PureView. So I think many clients have access to PureView based on the Microsoft 365 licensing that they have, and it is an extremely powerful tool. Right now, there's certain implementations of it. Right, you could start out very basic and then go to very advanced. But as we see clients going along the AI journey, PureView is going there step by step with them. Right, so implementing some basic controls in the beginning as you're starting to use tools like Copilot, and then advancing those as you're using other SaaS platforms and maybe other third-party systems as well. But being able to track that data and secure it across the board is really important, right? It gives you visibility into how some of these tools are being used. What Robbie touched on around application sprawl gives you really good visibility into app sprawl as well. Can show you where some of your data is going that you may not have realized. And again, like, these are things where people probably have access to the licensing and didn't even realize, right? It takes a partner to help you implement it, but these are tools that you can start using today to really lock your data down.
One of the things, if you don't mind me jumping in, sorry, but one of the things that I'm hearing a lot of is that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be uploading my sales and inventory reports into Google's Gemini just randomly. Is that a little bit okay? Just wondering.
Yeah, we definitely, that's the part that we struggle with, because
for sure,
if everyone has access to it, they can put all the data that they want in there. And then how do you make sure that the LLM doesn't share some of that sensitive data that could, violate confidentiality, compliances, and other things? Ron, how do you prioritize all this stuff? Data masking, encryption, adversarial training. What are you prioritizing?
Well, the piece I just want to kind of touch on here is that, the part that kind of kills me a little bit is that, AI kind of has this different, it's different, but really from a technology perspective, it's not, right? Like, these platforms are, what we're looking to do is bring a platform in. Well, what would you do if you needed a different type of platform? You develop use cases, right? And once you had your use cases, you'd go out and you do research on platforms that could deliver on those use cases, and then you'd put together risk assessment to make sure that the platform is secure, how you're going to use the platform. Then you're going to roll out acceptable use for the same people that shadow IT, shadow AI. They still have to follow an acceptable use policy of what you're supposed to do, along with what's approved and what's not approved, along with those AI applications. And then you pick the best in breed product for what you're trying to deliver. It might be, for the analyst, triaging a PowerShell command that I used, maybe an OpenAI connection is fine for that. And the data might be publicly, publicly accessible for those pieces of it. But you might decide, okay, well, our data is within Microsoft Graph. And so from a large language model, maybe we want to use Copilot for the data that we have internally. And then we're able to kind of use, different platforms to meet different needs of the business. But it all really should follow the same principles that all of your other technology did. And so it really shouldn't be like the different case of just because it's AI. I mean, yes, there's always that chance that somebody's going to use it for nefarious purposes, but that's why, hopefully you've got other controls wrapping around your environment that says, the users should only have access to certain data and it should only be used in certain ways. So that's the way we kind of view it here at Vertec.
My favorite is when somebody puts a question into their large language model, it spits it out and they don't love what it wrote. So then they go and copy and paste it into a different LLM and get a different result, and then go copy and paste it into a different LLM. And then we should spread it all around.
Well, and Jason, you're not kidding. Like you can literally give two different people that have different mind, gonna ask you different questions, and they can put biases into into what the results are. Or if you like a product versus another product, I mean, who hasn't done that? Like, okay, this competitor, what do they do versus what do we do? Okay, let's compare. I don't really like what they said. Let me see if I can tweak it a little bit to get it to slightly, curve things over my way. And it's really is possible. And that's where you need to still be an expert to understand the data that's outputting, to know whether it's legitimate or whether it's something that we shouldn't be following. That's not good advice.
Totally agree. So Dane, it's in the name, Sky Data Vault. So, what's most important as you guys are sitting there trying to say we need to figure out ways to implement and secure AI better? What are your suggestions as to how to prioritize it and making sure that we're protecting that data?
Yeah, well, Richard and I have a lot of the same view on it. What it really revolves around is models are there's not a lot of ways to control it. They can be out of control when they generate things, depending. Like we've gotten really good at putting a lot of controls around that, but the most important piece is making sure that the models don't have access to data they're not supposed to have access to at any given point in time. So I can only have access to the data that I'm supposed to see when I'm prompting it. A lot of people tend to go in and they build RAG models and they just give it a huge data set and they can get access to all kinds of things. And then when you add in the idea of adversarial prompting, it allows you to break a lot of those controls that models are trained against to get through those things. So if the model doesn't even have access to the data in the first place, you can't, even with adversarial prompting, you can't get it to spit out some of that data. So that's really kind of the most critical piece for us, is making sure that access controls are there, that you have the proper security controls. And then even after that, you're actually monitoring the outputs of the models as well, using some other system that can, validate and make sure that there's not some sort of data leakage and things like that. There's a lot of ways to really break models these days. So being very concise with how you're doing your security models around that beforehand is absolutely imperative to success on that.
I love it. Thanks, Dane. All right, just so everyone knows, I keep throwing curveballs at these guys. They don't have canned questions. So I want to hear a customer example. Let's start with you, Ron, and then we'll go Dane, Rich, Robbie. So customer example, you can just say industry, what were the issues they had, how they were tackling AI, and what did you do to help them? I think about, we had a customer come to us that was in the legal space and said, listen, we have years and years and years worth of cases, and they're just sitting hardcore paper in file cabinets, but we need to be able to access them quicker. So we took 20 years worth of data and digitized them all so that they could actually search it using an AI LLM and get the results quicker, which made them more efficient, allowed them to be more resourceful, which is obviously about the employee experience and the customer experience. So Ron, walk us through a customer. What industry? What did they come to you for? How did they want to adopt AI? And what did you do to help them?
Well, I can give you one example. So law firm, we actually got in there because of a data breach, and we helped them to evict the threat actor. And really, we kind of broke down what had happened for the executive team. And it really came down to, they had an endpoint detection product that had missed the alert and ransomware had spread throughout the environment. And in that case, it was a specific, what are we going to do so this never happens again? And that's where we kind of pulled out Halcyon, which is one of the products out of our tool belt, which is an endpoint specialized ransomware protection and recovery platform. But the difference between that EDR product, and I won't call out the name here, but the EDR product had missed something. But if you think about it, yes, and the customer said, well, doesn't it have anomaly detection? Aren't we using AI here? Yes, but it's trained on to detect the plethora versus different types of threats, right? It's kind of a catch-all of your EDR program, whereas opposed to like an endpoint product like Halcyon is only trained on ransomware behavior, and it's trained to look at the processes and be able to inject itself into the process to be able to reverse engineer or be able to capture the key. And so, where a product like an EDR product is not going to have, key recovery capabilities, right, including in their package, where this was a product specifically driven to be able to reverse engineer and be able to back out the ransomware if it did encrypt systems. So at that point, with dual extortion threat actors, you can't wait to restore from backups at that point. Your data is already offshore, and so you got to catch it right at the time, and you've got to be able to, have the capabilities. And that's one example of where, specialized AI capable tools have their place amongst other tools that can solve problems for clients.
I love it. Thanks. Dane, how about you?
Yeah, one of the best use cases for AI is something that's something that everybody hates doing, right? Looking something up. One of the best use cases was we had a customer come to us and say, hey, look, we have this really, really, really deep compliance process that we have to go through. There's so much documentation, there's mountains of it, and it's really hard to work with. Part of the reason why Google uses AI for search is because it can condense down really complex information like that and make it really digestible for users. So one of the best use cases is taking data that's not necessarily sensitive. If you have an organization, they want to get into AI, take a data set, whether it's compliance, legal is one of the best places. You can take a bunch of laws and put it into a RAG model and have it pump out a lot of really good answers where you can actually digest the information for the end user very quickly instead of them having to go through. Another one is knowledge bases. Knowledge bases are one of the best places to use AI. If you have an internal company knowledge base, use that and give that to your end users so that way they can use that. Sales information, right? Salespeople always have questions that are technical in nature. We have our salespeople pinging us continuously. Hey, does this product do this? Does this product do this? If you can put that into a RAG model and give them access to that data on the fly, the salespeople are armed and dangerous now. So that's probably one of the best ones that I've seen.
Love it. Thanks, Dane. Rich.
I think, we've done a number of projects, custom solutions around AI. One of the most impactful that I saw, we deal with a lot of financial service clients, and we had a fairly large hedge fund. They get a ton of research in the morning, right, across the board from different brokers and research firms. And all of this comes into their, inboxes, right? And they have to digest all of this before the market opens, right? And, all the news going around today and everything going on in this economic climate, like to digest that and have it in a way that you could actually make decisions around your portfolio, right, real time as soon as the market's open is challenging, right? You have multiple analysts looking at reports, trying to correlate them, bring them together. And what we did was we aggregated that content for them. We also merged it with other financial models that they had internally. We could update those models based on the different reports that came in. And we didn't make, obviously, any trading decisions, just really surface the data side by side in a clean, concise way in seconds, versus being able to read through all this stuff in like an hour and a half before the market opened. And, look, having run IT on the financial service side for a while, to hear a trader go, wow, I can't live without this tool going forward, that felt good. And you could see the power of it, right? They see that, hey, AI is not going to make a decision for me. It's going to give me the information I need to make a good decision much faster, right? And, I always say AI has really helped us kind of catch up to the pace of business, right? If you really think about things, the pace of business has grown tremendously over the last 5-6 years, right? Things move lightning quick, and we needed better tools to help us make better decisions. And AI has kind of leveled the playing field a bit now. I know personally, I probably have 10 hours back a week now, right, that I could focus on other things because of the AI tools that I use every day. So, and that's why I said earlier, I think, there's so many use cases within each organization. And what I always say to people is find the thing that's like the most inefficient you do. And I bet you there's a way to make it more efficient leveraging AI. And then also find the thing that is your secret sauce. Like what makes your organization drive revenue, drive performance. And I bet you AI can add some gasoline to that fire as well.
Rich, I thought we just pattern everything off of whatever Warren Buffett does in the stock market. But if you have a tool that allows us to go buy stocks and make money, I think you need to share this to everybody.
If I had it that was working 100%, I wouldn't be on this call. So
I'd like to know what the output of those trades were.
But following Warren Buffett or Pelosi, he's probably not a bad choice either.
It's true.
Robbie, what do you got?
And one of the things I did recently, I think Rich, you and I were on some panel, I can't remember where, but recently, one of the things I did was look at probably over 100 use cases across a bunch of industries that we've built, AI, data, automation, generative AI sort of, workloads for. And ultimately, they really broke down into three categories: prediction, personalization, and segmentation, right? Prediction, we all have been in the space for a while. We're trying to predict something before it happens. Sound like Yogi Berra. Those use cases generally are pretty good from a security perspective, because data doesn't need to we don't need to worry about anonymization as much. We don't need to worry about, the we're literally trying to predict a behavior and predict certain, machines from breaking before they do. So there's a lot of use cases in retail and manufacturing. But I'll tell you the other two: personalization and segmentation. When we're trying to really personalize a service for an individual or for a group of individuals, or you're trying to segment or bucketize, groups into group A, group B, and group C, that requires a lot more analysis, and it requires a lot more sort of anonymization of data. Therefore, all the security stuff that we've talked about. So my advice to the advisors out there is, who are thinking about AI, talking to organizations about data and AI, think about them kind of at a very categorical general level: prediction, personalization, and segmentation. And then think through, like, what kind of data is required for each of those type of use cases, and then how that data needs to be protected, what the data capture, governance, and then extraction sort of strategies and capabilities need to be able to accomplish this.
Awesome. Great questions. Okay, so this is going to be a two-parter. One, I want to talk about governance, risk, and compliance. I think when you think about governance, we're talking frameworks, we're talking, better roadmaps and strategies that we need to follow. I think that we want to, identify what does that look like. Risk is being driven down by the board, which is kind of funny that AI is being driven down by the board and risk is being driven down by the board. And if you think about where are we at with artificial intelligence, we're kind of where cloud was 15 years ago, where we didn't really care about securing it. We just wanted to get it all into the data center, make it better. And then we're like, oh, we'll secure it later. I feel like that's what everyone's doing now, because we have a lot of non-technical people trying to implement artificial intelligence. So risk is super huge, being driven down by the board. And then compliance. We just had a ton of new compliances pop up. We need better transparency, better accountability. We need to make sure that all these compliances are being addressed properly, and there's, better governance and policies in place. So let's talk about, one, where is AI going? And is governance, risk, and compliance going to be top priority as we continue to evolve this? Is there going to be better security? I would say that a lot of us are trying to figure out security with AI, where we don't necessarily have it fully baked. There's still a lot of products that I think are going to come down the pike here. So Robbie, let's start with you. Where are we going with AI? Is GRC going to be massively important? Are we going to see changes? And then how are we going to see that impact the future of this industry?
Yeah, first of all, yes, emphatic yes. It's not only important today, it's going to be even more important tomorrow. I think we need to do some, again, the definitional aspect of it. Governance. Now, fancy words that we throw around, but folks who are not as familiar, governance is ultimately answering a very simple question: who's in control? Now, even more so now with AI, we have to think through, like, if AI generates a prompt, generates a certain result, are we taking that as like the gospel? Are we in control, or is the AI in control? I think governance is all about roles and responsibilities. It's figuring out how to assign data owners. It's figuring out how to basically have stewards of the results that are being generated. They're actually human. Maybe a company needs to build an ethics committee. Like, governance is basically in that realm. Risk is, okay, what could go wrong? And often everything or something goes wrong. And this is where data privacy, making sure models don't leak, all the things we've talked about over the last hour, make sure there's not shadow AI going on, Is there misuse of sensitive customer or internal data in ways that are, sort of impactful to the business? So that's on the risk side. Compliance is ultimately, Jason, you mentioned it, every industry, healthcare, retail, financial services, going through its own evolution. CMMC, all the 2.0, 2.5, 3.0, all these things are basically saying, look, whatever we thought 3 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, isn't necessarily complete today. HIPAA 2.0. So basically, compliance is, are we literally aligned to the laws, the regulatory mandates, and the standards that ultimately are there to protect us as a business, and obviously, more importantly, protect our customers. So yes, I agree with everything that you're saying.
Rich, where are we going? Where's AI going? Do you think GRC is going to become a bigger conversation?
I think it already is becoming a bigger conversation. One of the things that I try and tell people, and I see it like we've implemented this with our GRC offering is, and I probably sound like a broken record because I think I mentioned this earlier about AI in general, but it is like no other, like treat it like any other platform. Treat the data it's using like any other platform you would use. Oftentimes, people have enough in their existing policies and procedures to cover how you should handle data and applications, what you should do around data privacy and security. Most of enterprise companies, most mature organizations have good policies and procedures in place. They just need to map the use of AI back to that, right, and show that coverage. That's really kind of the first step. The second piece is AI is going to create some delta, right? Because its use cases are more kind of broad. You might be using different tools that you haven't used before. So then understand what that delta is, and then create your AI policies and procedures around that delta, right? But oftentimes people are like, oh, like they don't know where to get started. Like you probably have a lot there, right? That you need to get started with. I do think that we're probably not going to see here in the US any regulation around AI in the near term. And I think that is probably what organizations struggle with, because everyone's looking for a North Star to kind of say, hey, like, what should I align with? I think over time we'll see that evolve. I know NIST has some things coming out as well, some updates. So I think we'll see some of that evolve. But what I tell organizations is you got to find your own North Star, right? This is like, this is where like the heavy hands of the government's not going to like come in, right? You got to lay out what that North Star is and then really map those, controls to it and measure it. Because Jason, you nailed it. The board is always concerned about risk, right? They're always want to understand where you are from a risk perspective. GRC has been a really good tool to create transparency around risk to the board. Yeah. At the same time, they're trying to drive AI, right? And they're driving a lot of this kind of fast moving risk taking, right, on the data and application side, but it's all got to feed itself back in, right? Because you don't want to compromise your security program because of AI, right? And I think that's really key, right? And again, it comes down to really good hygiene and I think mapping it back. So.
Great, thanks, Rich. Ron, what do you got?
Well, there's probably a number of companies that will be listening to this, right? And they're thinking, well, we don't have an AI program developed yet. But the issue with that is that you can almost guarantee that there's users in that business using AI. They're using it to make their day, make themselves more efficient. That's just human nature. If they know that they can do things better, they're going to. So if you're a mature organization out there that already has the policies and the procedures, great. But even for all of those customers, you should be at least starting with an acceptable use or an announcement to the company that says, we acknowledge that AI is out there. This is the appropriate use with it, even before you get into the rest of the governance, so that you at least kind of cap it off where it is today to make sure that they know what is acceptable use, what is not acceptable use. Then it comes back to your controls, right? I mean, this is again like, what are we doing for data loss prevention? How are we tagging our data? Are we going to know where our data is leaving? Because if you've got a secure border around your data and somebody's using AI, well, how are they using AI? Well, they're copying that sensitive file outside the system to use a non-AI program that has not been approved by corporation. That somehow that data got there, right? And then the same rules that apply that say you can't take confidential data or client confidential data and move it outside to your home system to be able to do this should apply here. And if you don't have the correct controls to be able to identify that that's possibly happening, well, then you got to start there. You know, you got to start with at least the basic acceptable use, and you got to solidify your data loss prevention and make sure your data tagging and things are right so that you can at least identify when there's something going on that's nefarious.
I love it. Thanks, Ron. Dane?
Yeah, I'm just going to second what everybody else is saying. GRC is really, really incredibly important. Making sure that you have a policy that's flexible as well, making sure when you look at your GRC that you're able to iterate with AI, because AI iterates so quickly to be able to be ahead of that power curve. I think the most important part of the GRC is making sure that your users understand the realities of AI. I mean, again, with the whole copying files out, for all you know, they're sitting on their phone at their computer and they're just typing straight into there. There's ways that it can happen where you don't even know. So really enabling the users to understand, hey, look, this is powerful. We want you to use it, but we want you to understand there's a lot of risks for us. So making sure that the end user knows, so that way they can actually really be, effective in the whole policy, and making sure that, don't have all kinds of security holes without that. That's really going to be the most important piece in my mind.
Thanks, Dane. All right, Dane, we'll have you go first this time. All right, so let's talk about stats. So 2 years ago, we had a $150 billion budget worldwide to spend on cybersecurity, and global criminal activity was $8.6 trillion. Then last year, we got $175 billion to protect organizations, and it went up to $9.6 trillion. This year, it's gone up $40 billion. We're at $212 billion, and we're projected to have over $10 trillion in criminal activity. And the number one breach is still the humans. It's still clicking on emails. It's still all that nefarious stuff. So let's talk about user entity behavior analytics. Let's talk about the user. Okay, so we have more remote users. What are we going to do? What does the future look like? How does artificial intelligence help us with UEBA, protecting those users? And I'll give you some topics. Zero trust. Are we going to see a big uptick, more regulations, better zero trust models, especially when it comes to AI, and better principles and controls? Passwordless identity and access management. Rich, I want you to touch on, what you're doing in that space. Let's face it, everyone keeps putting in the same passwords. Are we going to hold employees to a password management platform tool to where they have to put in different passwords so that they're not using the same password to log into their computer and to log into Salesforce and to log into their finance folder? Privilege access management, and then we have, security awareness training. Let's face it, nobody wants to do it. Gartner says that we're making employees spend 49 minutes a year doing cybersecurity awareness training. Clearly, that's not enough. Dane, why don't you start on those topics? How are we going to protect the users better? Pick a topic.
Yeah, I would say that the best way to protect the users is to start thinking about ways that are phishing resistant. The number one thing that we see a lot of is that AI is becoming more and more advanced in its ability to impersonate people. So making sure that when you're doing MFA and things like that, make sure that you have some sort of FIDO2 type thing where it's phishing resistant. So that way you have to have some sort of mechanism that can't be, just a code that could be texted to somebody and have them, pass that code on for the MFA. Things like that, I think, will be really, really critical in the pipeline. Making sure that there's, some sort of certificate-based login is always a really good way to handle that as well. One of the big challenges that we see is, let's say as a hoster, right, we have somebody call in, they say they're a customer. How do we know who that customer is that they say who they are, right? That's a big challenge. Being able to figure out how to verify somebody's identity these days is absolutely critical. And making sure that you have ways to authenticate even your end users as well as your customers, that's very, very important. So we're looking into things like security-based authentication, where you can actually validate that the certificates are correct through some sort of OCSP. So that way we know that that person is who they say they are and that it's not a revoked certificate, things like that. Leveraging PKI. There's a bunch of great ways to handle that stuff.
Love it. Thanks, Dane. Ron.
Well, so from our perspective, it's that you've got to make all these security products work together and in concert, right? And it all kind of starts with, identity access management. You got to make sure that you know who's accessing the environment, and you've got to be able to couple that with conditional access, and you got to couple that with device management. So it's like identity access management. The second layer is actually device management. You need to know the devices on your network are approved for corporate resources and they meet minimum standards. I can't tell you how many clients I see jump over that, and they go with minimum identity access requirements, and then they jump right to endpoint detection response or some sort of EDR product, but they miss device management as an example. And so you got to be looking for your approach, both, both AI in these platforms has to involve identities, has to involve device management, has to involve, endpoint protection. And it also has to have great, email and messaging security, not just the, the appropriate controls, but also even the simple things like the records, SPF records, and making sure that things are encrypted properly and communicating. So those are kind of the pieces that we look for, is that there's some building blocks, and there's and having done forensics on so many different data breaches in the past, it's typically those 3-4 layers of the stack that need to be working together. And you're not going to get that with single point solutions. You have to be kind of looking at it a little bit more broader.
Yeah, I agree. Better holistic conversation, less point solutions, because it's really hard for a lot of customers on this call even to take a lot of these point solutions and get them all to interact and have those APIs work seamlessly. Rich, how about you?
I think, both the panelists touched on it a little bit. It really does start with identity and access management. I think the power of AI, though, allows us to, when you think about Microsoft conditional access, like everyone thinks that that's enough, but it's good, but it's not great, right? I equate conditional access to, when there's construction on the road and they put up cones. Like, you shouldn't hit the cones, but if you hit them, you're probably going to go off the road and go into the spot that they don't want you to go into, right? And I think, like, what we want to put up is barriers, right? Like, we don't want people to be able to go into the area that they shouldn't go into. And the real way to put up barriers is to not just understand what Microsoft sees, but what Zscaler sees or iBoss sees, or what your other platforms out there have great telemetry, right? They're all doing different things at different times, and being able to bring that data together, right? Similar to what Dave was also talking about around certs, and like measuring all that information at the point of login and making a decision, right, around, is this a valid login attempt, and passing that through or not. That's going to be the power, right? Because there's so many areas now, especially even with the true zero trust framework, that could still be compromised, right? And a lot of it is good IT hygiene, but using AI to get all of that telemetry together and to get rid of passwords, right? Because at the end of the day, passwords are inherently flawed, and at some point you'll be able to crack any password that exists anyway. So we have to rethink the way that we think about users logging in. I know that's a little more like futuristic approach, but I think it's coming faster than people think, right? Because again, the threat environment is changing quickly, and there's some really good tools for business email compromise now, and tools like Abnormal for phishing emails. Like, they do a really good job of stripping them out, but it's only a matter of time before threat actors figure out ways around some of these things, right? And compromise legit accounts. So really kind of taking it to the next level, using all of the data you have to make good decisions about logins, I think is where it's going to be in a few years. So
I hate when I come up with a really good password and then the entity that I used it for says, "Oh, we've been compromised. Your new password is needs to be changed." I thought cones on the road were suggestive, Rich. Robbie, what do you got?
I think the guys have done a great job talking about zero trust and SASE, so I'm not going to belabor that fact. I think go back to the user side for a minute. We're never going to get into a world where the users are all of a sudden, educated and perfect users. They're just not. I think Copilot has, as an example, coach mode, right? So basically coaches you as you're writing an email. It gives you suggestions, as well as within some of the other apps. I'm starting to see the evolution of, if you will, cyber coaches, right? Imagine if I could just ask a simple human question. Hey, is this email safe? Like right now, like we're relying on a training I did 6 months ago to then for me to take action on something that is happening in real time. So I think where we're going to get to, and we're getting to, and I'm starting to see some technologies evolve there, is in real time. I just received an attachment from Jason Stein. I don't know. I don't. That guy's a little shady to me. I want to be able to validate and
TikTok.
verify very quickly if that attachment is valid. So I think those kind of things to really work in conjunction with the user are going to be something that we start seeing here in 2025 and beyond. I feel like that's really, if you will, a little bit closer to utopia.
Awesome. So let me have you guys each leave a 1-minute parting thought. Let's talk about AI and cybersecurity. What's the number one thing that for the customers that are on this call should be focused on? Is it the AI piece first? Is it the cybersecurity piece first? Is it their plan, the roadmap, the framework? What's one thing that you would leave people on this call out of all the things that we've talked about? And then Dan, we'll pass it over to you. Robbie, you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to end with what I started with. This is why I love technology and why I love using technology to solve business problems. We're no longer are we. I remember we had we used to have like. Remember the old days when we had magazines? We had like Network Magazine and Cybersecurity Magazine and CIO Magazine, which was more for strategic people. Now all of a sudden, over time, over the last 30 years, everything is the same. It's the consolidation. It's the convergence of everything. So I feel like what I said, and I'm just going to double down on it, is you cannot have a conversation about cloud without having a conversation about security, and you can't have a conversation about AI without thinking through your cloud strategy and your cybersecurity strategy. So customers, partners, activators, implementers have to think about it much more holistically. The tools, AI tools, give us the power to do so, but it also, we got to recognize that those same tools are available to the bad actors as well. And so as we're thinking about evolution, the industry's thinking about evolving, the businesses are thinking about leveraging technology. My word of thought, or the train of thought, is thinking about it holistically, not just in silos.
Awesome. Rich.
Robbie kind of, hit the nail on the head. I'll just, add to that and, establish those guardrails, right? I think, before you can get your program like running at speed, establish the guardrails around what AI means to your organization, right? What are the right rules, the acceptable use of the tools, right? And then, begin to kind of peel away at this, right, in a very structured way, right? Think about the POCs, right, the MVPs that I talked about earlier. Think about the data security, but do it in a small way and then expand it out, gradually. Because again, like there's so many tools out there, right? And if you don't have something in place now, your data is probably leaving your four walls as we speak, right? Users are going to use these tools. I use the same analogy that, Dane used. Like users are like water. They find the path of least resistance all the time. So even if you're blocking something, they'll take it and they'll type a whole document on their phone. Now, if you ask them to type that document into Word, they probably wouldn't do it, right? But they'll type it into AI, right? And usually this is your most prized data, right? So don't waste any more time. Get the policies, procedures, and controls in place. And then start developing use cases and enable your users with the right technology. Because if you don't enable it, they're going to find a way to use it, right? And I think that's the important piece. People are like, oh, I'm trying to get my hands around them. Like, you have to get your hands around it today. And it's easier to get started than you think, right? And I think that's my, tidbits to, the folks here on the call today.
Thanks, Rich. Ron.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to summarize here, there's definitely AI benefits, right? There's enhanced threat detection, there's faster incident response, right? There's improved threat hunting, potentially reduced false positives. But then on the flip side, there's also these concerns, right? We talked about biases. We talked about, well, one thing we didn't talk about was AI poisoning, right? I mean, all these tools are learning from something. All it takes is a nefarious actor to go, implement something into the learning models, and we end up with a supply chain risk, which different problem. But human oversight is definitely a concern. You can't rely on what AI is gonna output all the time. AI is not infallible. It may make mistakes, right? And then of course, the data privacy concerns, and that's where all the regulatory requirements, acceptable use, and everything come in. So there's definitely the positives, but there's definitely a number of concerns that we have which still requires that you're layering security, right? Because at the end of the day, you're almost layering AIs because they're all learning from different sources. And it's still almost the same principles, just applied to newer technology.
Love it. Thanks. Dane, wrap us up.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I would say, you know, Rich and I are going to share a lot of the same opinion about AI. It's really going to be about balance, right? Absolutely, you need to look at the cybersecurity piece of it, but you also have to find that balance with the users. Absolutely find a way to get it into your organization and get used to it. Find a trusted way to implement it and start small. Whether it's, you know, finding one of these common models and putting it in your organization and teaching the users how to use it. Starting small with the users and getting them educated on what AI is and getting them exposed to it, I think is really going to be the key to success if you don't already have an AI program. If you do, absolutely look at the security and do a deep dive into it.
I love it. This has been a great, Dan, I'm going to pass it back to you. We've got some amazing suppliers on this call. I thought there were some fantastic answers. Really appreciate the opportunity here.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. And I did have one example. This is kind of a layman's term for some of my clients and even for myself. But the idea for me was that, hey, back in the 80s and 90s, when I went to my mechanic for transmission work, they identified the problem, did a tune-up, did a look around, but they didn't know that a week later I'd have an exhaust manifold issue. And I came back to him and I said, hey, why didn't you check for this? We can't check for everything. It would take hours upon days for us to go through your entire car and look at this. Well, now, here in the 2000s, we've got something called an OBD scanner that you can just plug into your onboard computer, find out and diagnose most of the issues. Well, guess what? That's putting it into our world. That's cybersecurity. That's AI, identifying problems and alerts and monitoring these things through the computer. But not to mention, now we also in the automation industry, we have federal regulations for emissions and inspections that we have to get on our cars now. So there's compliance there when it comes to cyber insurance and compliance. And then there's diagnostic tools that we're talking about that make our lives a lot easier, that make things better for us and more secure and running more smoothly. So that's one of the things I use when I talk to my clients to help them better understand this is what this is. That was a layman's term for it with my car, but it still makes things run better as a whole. So just as a whole, I want to say thank you to all of you guys for being here. Ron, Rich, Robbie, Dane, and Jason, thank you very much for being here. For everyone that's out there right now on this webinar, if you want to get started into any of these categories or learn more, we implore you to go to cloud@cmsc.com. I've got it written up here. You can't see it now, though, can you? Cloud@cmsc.com. It's also in the chat here. We have recorded this webinar, and we're going to be sending this out on email, on LinkedIn, not to everywhere on LinkedIn, just if you want it. We're not going to flood the market and make everybody, force feed them if they don't want to, sit through the webinar. But we want everyone to know that we're here and we're able to help you. We can get that discovery done, and we can get you guys set up with any one of our suppliers that you heard here today. As you know, they were all experts and had great answers and completely understand this scenario and can help you better right-size your organization and make things more secure and increase your productivity as a whole as well. So everyone on this webinar is going to be getting a gift card from Telarus as well. So just wanted to let you guys know that. And with that, I think that's all we've got. I appreciate each one of you for being here, answering these questions, and giving us some better insight into the world of cybersecurity and AI. And we look forward to working with each of you in the next few weeks. So
Right.
thank you guys very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.